Hello out there to all you banjo fans. If you know anything about me, I played this a lot back in the 70s and in the 80s too. On the other side was the folk banjo. That's what this is, and that's what we're going to talk about. The folk banjo was popularized by a group called the Weavers back in the late 1940s, from 1948 to 1952. The Weavers had so many hits you could hardly count them. They had the Midnight Special, they had Irene Goodnight, they had This Land Is Your Land, they wrote the Hammer Song. Lee Hayes and Pete Seeger, who were members of that group, wrote the Hammer Song. They had the Rock Island Line. This Land Is Your Land was written for them by Woody Guthrie. Guantanamera. The Lion Sleeps Tonight, Weem-Away, was a top 10 hit. The first time ever by the Weavers. So the Weavers had a 5-string banjo in the group. They were the first group ever to do it. They were the first folk group ever. And all those other ones that came along in the 50s and in the early 60s were all stepchildren of the Weavers. They wrote the book, they did it all, and they did it all better than any other group. However, in 1952, after 4 years of recording nothing but hit records, they were blacklisted and basically out of the business. This was an interesting time, 1950 and 52, 51, because Frank Sinatra was out of the picture for a while, and in came, to fill this void, some kind of interesting music, very different. Johnny Ray was one. He was a precursor to Elvis Presley, terrific singer, and a fine actor too. You can see him in No Business Like Show Business. He's very good. And the Weavers came in and filled this gap with folk music, but they were brought to us courtesy of Gordon Jenkins and his orchestra. So we still had orchestra music. And the first rock and roll was brought to us courtesy of the big time orchestra, King Curtis and his orchestra, all of them, whether it was, Rock Around the Clock, Bill Haley had an orchestra, Little Richard had an orchestra. So the last thing that the big band era did for us was give us folk music and rock and roll. Anyway, I digress. So this is the long neck 5-string banjo. Now the normal banjo ends right here. The headstock, that's what this is called, where the pegs are, the tuning pegs, that would be down here. But these 3 frets were added by Pete Seeger in the 1940s, or maybe early 50s, no, the 40s. He took a regular banjo that he had, a Vega banjo, and he went down to the Greenwich Village, and there was a tremendous luthier there, and he made great guitars, but he also did work on the side, and he added these 3 frets, spliced them in somehow, can hardly even tell, and then put the headstock back, spliced that back on. Seamless job. So he invented this banjo for himself because he wanted to get a lower sound. By lowering this capo down here, he could get the banjo open to play a much lower sound and sing in some new keys without having to always go up. It's really quite a nice thing. You don't see these banjos played by anybody anymore. And most of the people that I knew, in fact, all of them that I knew, who were masters at playing this instrument, made their living with it, have all passed away. And they showed me just everything they knew how to do, and I picked it up off records anyway. D'Angelico was the name of the luthier, by the way, who made those wonderful guitars that are the best jazz guitars ever. D'Angelico was the one who added those 3 frets for Seeger. He had a shop in Greenwich Village. Okay, now the banjo is not a guitar. It's an instrument which is basically a machine. And right here you have the head. It's made of plastic. It's frosted. In the old days, it used to be some kind of calf skin. And when the weather was moist, the skin would get moist and it would everything would sink down and go out of tune, and it was hard to play, and a whole bunch of things would happen. So when they introduced the plastic head, it made everything stay, no matter what the weather was, your sound stayed the same. This is quite a good thing for banjo players. If you want to change this head, you have to take this ring off. You have to undo and unscrew every one of these little bracket holders. There's 28 of them, all going all around. And then you put the new head in, you put the bracket down, and you tune these bracket holders. One over here, one over there, one over here, one over there, one over here, one over there. Kind of like you do the lug nuts on a tire, so that, the thing stays down across the board consistently with the same tension. If you do just one side, it all screws it all up. You can't get it back and figure it out. And the banjo, if you don't know how to do these things, can be a very frustrating piece of machinery. The other thing you have on this instrument is the tail piece right here, which is a piece of tail down here, and it has a little screw in the back. And if you screw that down, the tail piece goes lower, and if it goes lower and comes nearer to touching the head, it creates a sharper sound. And if you turn that screw and raise it, and it becomes higher, it produces a mellower sound. All the while, of course, every time you adjust this, you throw the strings out of whack, you got to retune it. Then the bridge here, there are different heights. Again, the higher the bridge, the louder; the lower the bridge, the softer, but it's easier to play because the string height is lowered. We call the string height the action of the strings. So the higher the action, the higher the bridge; the lower the action, the lower the bridge. Sometimes they even go in and thin these 3 little feet that hold this bridge down. You can see the 3 little feet. And you don't thin the bottom part where it touches the head, but the part that's just below the top, you thin them out. And it makes it even brighter and transmits the sound even better. The 5th string peg was added in 1823 or 25 by a guy named Joe Sweeney. I don't know how I know that, but I believe that's the truth. And the 5th string is never fretted. It always sort of rings along with the chord. And we have a number of tunings that we use on the banjo. Now, a really good banjo picker whose instrument this is, who's basically using this all the time, it's his primary instrument. A really fine traditional banjo player will know many, many tunings, and it gets quite complicated. But for simple guys like me, 3 or 4 was all I could ever handle, and I never saw Pete Seeger use more than 3 or 4 tunings, although I'm sure he knew a lot of others. Occasionally he'd fool around with a 5th string and fret that somehow. And we have these little nails that we put in the neck so we can actually raise it. Put it there and you fret it in. It goes. So you don't have to tune it up and break it. You just fret it and tune it down. Those are little 5th string capo nails of some sort. That's called a capo. So now, this string, I'm going to play in a G tuning. And all of banjo playing really comes from the frailing stroke. Frailing is the earliest kind of banjo playing. I mean, the banjo is an African instrument, really. It was just a gourd and a stick, and it modified itself into a 4-string instrument until this 5th string was added, but it all comes from Africa. And so the frailing strum is all downward. It's, you hit down. Frailing is called rapping, it's called framing, there's all kinds of country ways of calling frailing, but it's all hitting down. You see, when you hit down, it makes that string very percussive. It's different from picking up. So it gives you quite a snap. So the basic frailing basic strum is pick one note down, and I have a finger pick on my middle finger that's down. It's like, then a little brush, and then a fifth string pluck with your thumb. And if you get that going with a little, you can even play two. You can, instead of plucking down one string, you can pluck down two strings. So it gives you kind of a nice little strum. Now you can play it as a nice little strum, or you can use the downstroke. That's Cripple Creek. But I'm doing some forward double thumbing, which means that I'm going. Bring my thumb over. That's forward double thumbing. Backward double thumbing is when you pick the string, the high string first. That's hard to do frailing. So you got double thumbing, and you've got that little strum, and you've got your G tuning. So that's let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine her ever-loving light on me. Well, if you ever go to Houston, you better walk right. You better not stagger. You better not fight, because the sheriff will arrest you. He's gonna take you down, and you can bet your bottom dollar that you're jailhouse bound. Let the midnight special. So you see there, that's just hitting down. Then you, what we call hammer on, you hammer on to that string right there. This is a G tuning. So you hammer on, so it's, and then brush up. As I went walking, living on a highway, I saw above me in the skyway, I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. You see how easy that is? You got an open G chord. You just have to learn a simple C and a simple D7 and this wonderful strum with a little hammer on there on the bass string on the second fret. I mean, what could be easier? The Weavers would do Wimawag, and you'd hear the. can be very, very simple and very exciting. And there's just a couple of other things parenthetically. Some of the other tunings, another interesting tuning is C tuning. And traditional players will do a lot of double thumbing. So this is like the Arkansas Traveler, and there's a couple of different kinds of double thumbing in this song, and I'll just play a little bit of it. But you mix them up. So this is forward. And then you go to the second part, it's backward. So up to speed is... Okay, forward and backwards. C tuning. Now, you can get a G minor tuning by lowering the second string to an A sharp. Now you're playing a G minor. And this is the key that I play Babylon in on the American Pie album. And this is what I do. That's Babylon, and that was recorded by a bunch of different people later on. One more little thing on the banjo, this is fun to do, is the rasgado, which is from flamenco music. You take your fist and you unfurl it one finger at a time. Well, that's about it. Hope you enjoyed it.